The worn linoleum of the diner floor was cold and unforgiving against his knees. But Cale Adebayo didn't feel it. He didn't feel the sticky patch of spilled syrup near his left leg or the stares of the half-dozen patrons nursing late-night coffee. All he could feel was the tectonic shifting of his entire world, the breaking of a dam inside his chest he hadn't known was even there. In his hand, he clutched a thin, worn paper envelope. It wasn't sealed. Inside, he could see the edges of worn bills, 20s, 10s, 5s, and 1s, a stack of tangible struggle. On top of the cash was a folded bank slip, a withdrawal receipt. He had already seen the number printed there, $4,278.15. And underneath it, the new balance, $0. Her entire life savings. Across the small Formica table, Amara watched him, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of concern and unwavering resolve. She had no idea that the man kneeling before her, dressed in a frayed hoodie and jeans he bought from a thrift store for this very performance, was worth an estimated $3.7 billion. She didn't know the news reports of his financial ruin were an elaborate, multi-million-dollar fabrication, a desperate, insane test orchestrated by a man terrified of being loved for his wallet. All she knew was that the kind, gentle man she had come to care for, the man she knew as Leo, was broken, and her first, last, and only instinct was to give him everything she had. She reached a hand across the table, her fingers, calloused from kneading dough and scrubbing floors, hesitating just above his shoulder. Her voice was soft, the same gentle tone she used when calming her younger sister after a nightmare. "Leo," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "Please, get up. It's only money. We'll make more." The word "we" struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was a word he had heard countless times, a word that had always been attached to his fortune, a "we" that meant you and I will enjoy your money. But her "we" was different. It was a "we" forged in scarcity, a "we" that meant you and I will face this hardship together. It was the most valuable "we" he had ever heard. The waitress stood frozen by the coffee machine, a pot held midair. A trucker in a nearby booth slowly lowered his newspaper. They were witnessing something intimate and profound, a moment that felt too sacred for the greasy air of a 24-hour diner. Cale looked up at Amara, and for the first time in a decade, the man who could buy cities and topple corporations felt utterly powerless. Tears streamed freely down his face, hot and cleansing. He wasn't acting anymore. This was real. The test was over. He had his answer. He had pretended to have nothing, and in response, this woman, who had next to nothing, had offered him everything. And in that moment, kneeling on a dirty floor, Cale Adebayo knew he had just found the only thing in the world worth having. If you believe that the truest wealth is not held in a bank, but in a heart, if you love stories where the quietest kindness makes the loudest impact, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell right now. Because the reward for this woman's sacrifice is going to be more beautiful and more satisfying than anything you can imagine. The payback in this story isn't just about money. It's about a justice so poetic it will restore your faith in the world. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, to a tiny market stall and a woman who smelled of sugar, cinnamon, and quiet resilience. 3 years before a billionaire knelt at her feet, Amara Nkwocha was brought to her knees by a man who wasn't worth a single one of her tears. Her world had ended, not in a cheap diner, but in a rented event hall with bad lighting and overpriced champagne. It was her engagement party to David Okoro, a man whose ambition shone so brightly it blinded everyone to the hollowness within. David was a junior real estate agent who dressed like a CEO, drove a leased BMW he couldn't afford, and spoke of building an empire with the casual confidence of a man who had never built anything more than a tower of debt. Amara, a baker with dreams as sweet and as humble as her pastries, had loved him. She believed in his fire, mistaking his hunger for status as a passion for life. She was 25 then, full of a soft, hopeful energy. She had baked for the party herself, a 3-tiered masterpiece decorated with delicate, handcrafted sugar flowers. Her hands, already showing the first signs of a life of hard work, had spent 2 days meticulously crafting each petal. It was a testament to her love, a physical manifestation of her patient, creative soul. She stood beside him, her dress a simple but elegant Ankara print, a flush of happiness on her cheeks. She was holding a tray of her signature chin chin, offering it to guests, when David tapped the microphone for attention. A hush fell over the room. Amara beamed at him, her heart thumping with anticipation. She thought he was going to toast her, to speak of their future. Instead, he gave a smile that was 40% real and 60% cosmetic dentistry, and began the speech that would shatter her life. "I want to thank you all for coming," he began, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Tonight is a celebration of a new chapter, of elevation, of moving to the next level." He paused, letting his eyes sweep the room before they landed on Amara. There was no warmth in them, only a cold, transactional appraisal. "And as part of that elevation," he continued, "sometimes we have to make difficult business decisions. We have to divest from assets that no longer serve the brand." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Amara's smile faltered. Her hand, holding the tray, began to tremble. What was he talking about? David's eyes slid past her to a young woman standing near the front, a woman in a designer dress with a bored, entitled expression. "And so, while I will always be fond of Amara," he said, the word fond landing like a slap, "my future, my brand, requires a different kind of partnership." He gestured to the woman. "I'm thrilled to announce my new partnership, both in business and in life, with the lovely Simone, daughter of the CEO of Crestview Developments." The tray of chin-chin crashed to the floor. The sound was lost in the collective gasp of the room. Simone smirked. David didn't even flinch. He looked down at Amara, at the shattered pieces of her baking and her heart on the floor, and delivered the final, devastating blow. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't look so surprised, Amara. You're sweet, but your dreams are small. You can't build an empire on cupcakes and flour dust." He sniffed, theatrically. "I need a partner, not a baker." The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision. He hadn't just broken their engagement. He had publicly belittled her work, her passion, her very essence. He had reduced her to the smell of her trade and the size of her dreams. No money, no plan, no place to go. The shame was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. She fled the hall, the sound of shocked whispers and a few cruel chuckles following her out into the cold night. That night, she lost not only a fiancé, but her home, as they lived in an apartment leased in his name. She was left with 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of baking supplies, and a humiliation so profound it felt like a permanent stain on her skin. For weeks, she was a ghost. She slept on a friend's couch, the echo of David's words playing on a loop in her mind. You can't build an empire on cupcakes. The world had seemed to agree with him. She was just a baker. But then, A call came from her grandmother in Ibadan, Nigeria. Her grandmother, a woman whose hands were wrinkled with the wisdom of generations, didn't offer pity. She offered proverbs. Amara, my child, she had said, her voice a comforting balm over the crackling international line. The fool looks at the finger pointing to the sky. The wise man looks at the sky. Do not look at his finger of scorn. Look at your own sky. And then she gave her the words that would become her compass. Remember, the hand that gives is the hand that gathers. Your hands are for giving. Let him keep his empty fists. Those words sparked a flicker of life in the desolate landscape of her heart. She had something David and his new fiancé would never understand. A gift in her hands. She had her grandmother's recipes, a legacy of flavor and love passed down through generations. She had her younger sister, Nia, who was 13 at the time and depending on her. She had her own sky to look at. So Amara got up. She rented a tiny, one-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable part of town, a place where the rent was cheap and the dreams were palpable. She took a night job cleaning office buildings, the harsh smell of chemical cleansers a stark contrast to the sweet scents of her baking. The work was grueling, from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m., scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans for people who never saw her face. At 3:30 a.m., she would return home, her body aching, and begin to bake. In her small, cramped kitchen, she found her sanctuary. She transformed flour, sugar, and butter into moments of joy. She baked puff puffs infused with nutmeg and orange zest, meat pies with flaky, impossibly light crusts, and her specialty, delicate almond cookies filled with a guava jam made from her grandmother's recipe. At 7 a.m., she would pack her goods, load them onto a small cart, and take the bus to the West End Market, a bustling, vibrant place where vendors from all over the world sold their wares. She set up her stall, a simple folding table with a cheerful, hand-painted sign, Amara's Bites. She worked the stall until 3 p.m., selling her pastries to construction workers, office ladies on their lunch break, and mothers with their children. Her prices were low, her margins razor thin. After packing up, she would go home, help Nia with her homework, prepare their simple dinner, and try to catch an hour or two of sleep before heading out to her cleaning job. It was a brutal, relentless cycle. But in that cycle, she was rebuilding herself. Her hands, once soft, became calloused and strong. Shared her water with the elderly. Flour shared her water with the elderly. Flower vendor next to her on hot days. Her hand was always open, always giving. And though her bank account grew at a painfully slow pace, her spirit, her true wealth, was gathering. She was looking at her own sky. Kale Adebayo, CEO of the $3.7 billion logistics and technology firm Adebayo Global, was a man who owned the sky. Or at least, he owned the private jets that flew through it. From his penthouse office overlooking the city, he could move mountains of capital with a single phone call. He had everything a man could want: wealth beyond measure, a formidable reputation, and a collection of vintage cars that would make a king weep. He had everything except the one thing he wanted most: a person who saw the man, not the money. His last relationship had ended in the sterile environment of his lawyer's office. He had watched his fiancée, a beautiful and whip-smart investment banker, argue with his legal team over a clause in their prenuptial agreement. It wasn't the argument itself that broke him. It was the look in her eyes, a cold, calculating gleam as she fought for a larger percentage of his future earnings. In that moment, he realized she wasn't negotiating for a life with him. She was negotiating an exit package. She was insuring her investment. He was not a partner. He was an asset. He called off the wedding the next day. The experience left him deeply cynical and isolated. He was haunted by the words of his late father, a man who had built the original shipping company from a single rusty freighter into a national powerhouse. His father, a man of profound wisdom and simple tastes, had told him on his deathbed, "Cale, my son, a man with the crown of gold must find a woman who sees his head, not the crown. For the crown can be taken, but the head, the heart, the soul, that is the man. Be careful of women who love the shine." For a year, Cale threw himself into his work, the emptiness of his personal life echoing in the vast, minimalist spaces of his penthouse. He felt like a king in a gilded cage. He was surrounded by people, employees, associates, society acquaintances, but he was utterly alone. He was tired of the shine. One sleepless night, staring out at the glittering city lights that represented his empire, a radical, desperate idea began to form in his mind. What if he could take off the crown? What if he could walk among people without the distorting glow of his wealth? What if he could find someone who saw his head, not the gold? The next morning, he called his head of security and oldest friend Marcus into his office. Marcus was a tall, impeccably dressed man with a perpetually unimpressed expression and a loyalty as solid as granite. He had been with Cale's family since Cale was a teenager. "I'm taking a sabbatical," Cale announced, swiveling in his chair to face him. Marcus raised a skeptical eyebrow. "A sabbatical, sir? The board will have an aneurysm. The board will be fine. You and I are going to create a new identity for me." Cale laid out his plan. It was audacious, theatrical, and, in Marcus's opinion, completely insane. Cale would disappear for a few months. He would shed the skin of Cale Adebayo, the billionaire mogul. He would become Leo, his middle name, a man of no consequence. He would shave his trademark sharp haircut and grow a scruffy beard. He would trade his Tom Ford suits for worn jeans and flannel shirts. He would swap his McLaren for a beat-up 20-year-old Toyota Tacoma that Marcus would procure from a police auction. "You want to pretend to be poor," Marcus stated, his voice flat. "I want to pretend to be normal," Cale corrected. "I want to find something real." Marcus sighed, the sound of a man who had heard his boss's wild ideas before. "And where will this normal man be living, sir? Not the penthouse, I presume." "No, a small, furnished apartment, somewhere anonymous. And I'll need a cover story, something simple." "And what is the end goal of this social experiment?" Marcus asked, his arms crossed. Cale looked out the window again. "To find a woman who would share her last piece of bread with a stranger." Marcus just shook his head. "Sir, with all due respect, you're more likely to get robbed." "That's a risk I'm willing to take," Cale replied, his voice quiet but firm. And so, the experiment began. Cale Adebayo vanished from the public eye, his company releasing a statement that he was on an extended, private retreat. Meanwhile, Leo emerged. He moved into a nondescript apartment complex across town. The first week was a culture shock. The lumpy mattress, the sputtering shower, the anonymity. It was both jarring and strangely liberating. He spent his days wandering the city, rediscovering it from the ground up. He took buses. He ate at food trucks. He frequented the public library. One afternoon, Drawn by a cacophony of sounds and smells, he found himself at the West End Market. It was a world away from the sanitized, curated environments he was used to. It was loud, chaotic, and vibrantly alive. Vendors shouted in a dozen languages. The air was thick with the scent of spices, grilled meats, fresh flowers, and diesel fumes. He was aimlessly wandering the crowded aisles when a particular aroma cut through the noise. A warm, sweet, intoxicating scent of cinnamon, butter, and something else he couldn't quite place. It was a scent of pure comfort. He followed it to a small, unassuming stall with a hand-painted sign, Amara's Bites. Behind the table stood a woman. She was focused, arranging a tray of golden brown pastries with a gentle precision. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, a stray dusting of flour on her cheek. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, functional braid. She looked tired, he thought, but there was a strength in her posture, a quiet dignity that was magnetic. He watched as a young mother with a crying toddler approached. The mother was fumbling in her purse, short on change. Amara just smiled, broke a warm cookie in half, and handed it to the child. "Don't worry about it," she said softly. "A little sweetness helps." The mother's gratitude was immense. Cale, or Leo, felt something stir in him. It was a simple act of kindness, one of thousands that probably happened every day. But he had seen it. He stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said. Amara looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. They were weary but clear. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice professional but not unfriendly. He pointed to a basket of small, round, fried dough balls. "What are those?" "Puff puffs," she said, spiced with a little nutmeg and orange zest. "I'll take one," he said, handing her a few dollars. She placed one in a small paper bag. As their fingers brushed during the exchange, he felt a small, unexpected jolt. Her hands were not soft and manicured. They were the hands of a worker, slightly rough, but warm. He took the puff puff and stepped aside, watching her. He took a bite. It was divine, warm, airy, with a perfect balance of sweetness and spice. It tasted like home, even though it wasn't a flavor from his own childhood. It tasted like care. He stood there for nearly an hour, just watching her. He watched her quiet grace, her patient interactions, her unyielding focus. He didn't know her story. He didn't know about David, or the cleaning job, or the sister she was raising. All he knew was that in the middle of this chaotic market, this woman was an island of calm, dignified strength. The experiment had just begun, but he had a feeling he had already found what he was looking for. Leo became a fixture at Amara's stall. Every day, around noon, the scruffy man in the worn clothes and the beat-up Toyota Tacoma would appear. At first, Amara thought he was just another customer. But he was different. He didn't just buy a pastry and leave. He lingered. He would buy a meat pie or a couple of her almond guava cookies and then find a plastic crate to sit on nearby, eating slowly, observing. He started to ask questions. Not personal questions, at least not at first, but questions about her craft. "What makes the crust so flaky?" he asked one day, gesturing with the remains of a savory pie. Amara, busy bagging an order, answered without thinking. "Cold butter, cold hands, and no shortcuts." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "No shortcuts. I like that." Another day, he asked about the guava jam in her cookies. "It's not like the kind from the store," he noted. "It's brighter." A flicker of pride lit up Amara's tired eyes. It's my grandmother's recipe. We make it with fresh ginger and a tiny bit of lime. She says the lime wakes up the sweet. He seemed to genuinely file this information away. He wasn't just making small talk. He was listening. He was seeing the art in her work, the history. No one had ever done that before. David had only ever seen the price tags. Amara was wary of him initially. Her experience with David had built a fortress around her heart. She was polite, but distant. Yet, Leo's quiet, consistent presence began to wear down her defenses. He never flirted. He never pushed. He just showed up, a calm and steady presence in her hectic day. One afternoon, a sudden downpour sent the market into a frenzy. Vendors scrambled to cover their goods. Amara's small tarp was unwieldy, and the wind kept catching it. Suddenly, Leo was there, his larger frame easily grabbing the flapping corners, helping her secure her pastries from the rain. He was soaked in seconds, but he didn't seem to care. He just held the tarp steady until the worst of the storm passed. "Thank you," she said, genuinely surprised. "Don't mention it," he replied, wringing out the hem of his flannel shirt. "Neighbors help neighbors." That small act was a turning point. She started to see him not as a customer, but as a person, a kind one. At the pastry in his hand, and then at her, she said, "For the help yesterday." He looked at the pastry in his hand, and then at her, and his smile was so genuine, it made her stomach do a little flip. "Thank you, Amara." It was the first time he'd used her name. Their conversations deepened. He told her he was new in town, that he'd been working a tough manual labor job that had ended, and now he was just trying to figure out his next move. It was a story woven from threads of truth, curated by Marcus to be plausible and unassuming. He learned about Nia, her talented younger sister who dreamed of being an artist, whose drawings filled every spare piece of paper in their tiny apartment. He learned about her grandmother in Nigeria, the source of her strength and her recipes. Amara found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone. She told him about the exhaustion, the constant worry about bills, the ache in her bones at the end of a 20-hour day. She never complained. She just stated the facts of her life. And he listened. He just listened, his gaze never leaving her face, making her feel like what she was saying was the most important thing in the world. One day, he saw her rubbing her shoulder, a deep ache from lifting heavy trays. Without a word, he took the box of supplies she was about to lift into her cart. "Let me," he said, and easily loaded the rest of her things. It was a simple gesture, but for Amara, who had been carrying every burden alone for so long, it felt monumental. As they stood by her cart, ready to part ways for the day, he hesitated. "Amara," he said, his voice a little uncertain, "I know you're busy, and I know you're probably exhausted, but would you have dinner with me sometime?" Her first instinct was to say no. A relationship was a luxury she couldn't afford, in time or emotional energy. Her heart was a boarded-up house. But as she looked at him, at his kind eyes and the hopeful, vulnerable expression on his face, a different feeling emerged. A tiny, tentative shoot of green in the barren soil. He wasn't like David. He wasn't flashy or loud. He was quiet and gentle, and he had seen her. Not her potential for elevation, but her, right now, covered in flour and bone-tired. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'd like that." He didn't take her to a fancy restaurant. He couldn't, in his guise as Leo. Instead, he took her to a small, family-run Ethiopian place tucked away on a side street, a place with mismatched chairs and the rich aroma of berbere spice. They shared a platter of dorowat and injera, eating with their hands. For the first time, Amara wasn't the one serving. She was being cared for. They talked for 3 hours. She told him about her dream of one day having a real bakery, a small shop with a proper kitchen and a few tables where people could sit and enjoy a moment of peace. Not an empire, just a haven. He told her about his parents, about his father's wisdom and his mother's love for gardening, editing the details to fit his cover story. As he walked her to her bus stop, a comfortable silence settled between them. Under the dim glow of a streetlight, he stopped. "Amara," he said, his voice low, "you are one of the most incredible people I have ever met." He wasn't looking at her with desire, but with something deeper, awe. And in that moment, for the first time since David had shattered her, Amara felt a tear slide down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or humiliation. It was a tear of being seen. He gently wiped it away with his thumb, his touch sending a current of warmth through her. He didn't try to kiss her. He just held her gaze. "Thank you for tonight," he said. As she rode the bus home, Amara touched the spot on her cheek where his thumb had been. The fortress around her heart didn't crumble, but she could have sworn she felt a window creak open, letting in the first breath of fresh air. 2 months into their tentative, gentle courtship, Cale knew. He was deeply, irrevocably in love with Amara. He loved her resilience. He loved her quiet generosity. He loved the way she talked about her sister with fierce, protective pride. He loved the way her hands, though calloused, could create things of such delicate beauty. He loved her, and he was living a lie. The deception, which had started as a tool, now felt like a heavy shroud between them. He had to tell her the truth. But how? How could he reveal the magnitude of his deception without destroying the fragile, real thing they had built? He confided in Marcus, who had been receiving daily, almost giddy, reports from his billionaire boss. They met in a discreet, out-of-the-way park. "She's the one, Marcus," Cale said, his voice filled with a certainty that had been absent for years. "I'm sure of it." Marcus, ever the pragmatist, nodded slowly. "I'm happy for you, sir, truly. But the reveal, it's going to be complicated. You've pretended to be a penniless drifter. The whiplash of you being one of the richest men on the continent might just break her neck." "I know," Cale sighed, running a hand through his now longer, unkempt hair. "But what if I could do one final test? Not of her, but of the situation. A test that would lead to the reveal." And so, the final, most audacious part of the plan was conceived. It was Marcus who called it Operation Phoenix, because Cale intended to burn his fake identity to the ground and see what rose from the ashes. Cale felt a pang of guilt. Amara had already been through so much. Was it fair to put her through this? But the fear, the deep-seated terror of his wealth being the foundation of their relationship, was too strong. He had to know, for certain, that she was with him, for Leo. With the ruthless efficiency of his corporation, Cale and Marcus set the stage. Cale's PR team, under strict NDAs, worked with a contact at a major financial news outlet. They crafted a devastatingly believable story. A massive, high-risk venture in renewable energy had gone catastrophically wrong. A hostile takeover by a rival firm had exploited the vulnerability. The headline was brutal. Tech mogul Cale Adebayo wiped out. Fortune evaporates in market collapse. The article was filled with convincing details, quotes from fake insiders, and speculation about bankruptcy. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. It was everywhere in an instant. That afternoon, Leo stumbled up to Amara's stall. He had practiced his performance, but the moment he saw her face, soft with concern as she looked at him, The acting fell away, replaced by the real, gut-wrenching guilt of his deception. He looked genuinely devastated. "Leo, what is it? What's wrong?" she asked, her hands stilling over a tray of cookies. He handed her his phone, the damning headline glowing on the screen. "The company I worked for," he said, his voice choked. "It's gone. The big boss, Adebayo, he lost everything." He then layered his personal lie on top of the public one. "I had all my savings in company stock. Everything. My apartment was corporate housing. They're taking it back. Amara, I have nothing." The look on her face was not pity. It was not disgust. It was pure, unadulterated empathy. She didn't hesitate for a second. She reached out, took his hand, and squeezed it tight. Her hand was warm, steady. "Okay," she said, her voice a firm anchor in his fake storm. "Okay. First, you will eat." She packed a box with 2 meat pies, a handful of cookies, and a bottle of water. She pressed it into his hands. Then she began to pack up her stall, hours earlier than usual. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm closing for the day," she said simply. "You're coming home with me. You can't sleep on the street." For the next 2 weeks, Cale lived the life of a broken man in Amara's tiny 1-bedroom apartment. He slept on her lumpy, worn-out couch. He watched as she got up even earlier, baked more, took on an extra cleaning shift on the weekend, all to make enough money to feed the 3 of them. She never once complained. She never made him feel like a burden. When he apologized for the 100th time, she just shook her head. "Leo, my grandmother taught me, you don't kick a man when he is down. You offer him a hand to help him up. Now, make yourself useful and help Nia with her geometry homework." He saw a side of her he hadn't even imagined. He saw her patience with her sister, her quiet budgeting at the grocery store, choosing the cheaper brand of rice so she could afford an extra orange for Nia's lunch. He saw her come home at 3 a.m., her body sagging with exhaustion, only to wash her face and start mixing dough for the day. His heart ached with a combination of overwhelming love and crushing guilt. This woman was a queen, and he was deceiving her. The breaking point came on a Friday night. She came home from the market, looking more tired than he had ever seen her. Sales had been slow. She counted the day's earnings, a small pile of bills and coins on the small kitchen table. It was barely enough to cover her costs. He saw the flicker of despair in her eyes before she quickly masked it. "It's okay," she whispered to herself. "Tomorrow will be better." That night, Cale knew the test had to end. He couldn't let her suffer for his fear a moment longer. He arranged to meet her at the 24-hour diner down the street the next morning, telling her they needed to talk seriously about their future. The next morning, they sat in a worn vinyl booth. Amara had a determined look on her face. Before he could get a room for a month, get some new clothes for interviews. "You can't give up." He opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of cash and the withdrawal slip. $4,278.15. Balance, $0. He stared at it, the numbers blurring through the sudden rush of tears to his eyes. He looked at her. She had given him her entire safety net, the money she had painstakingly saved over 3 years of brutal, back-breaking work. She had given him her past and her future in a single, selfless gesture. "Amara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," she said simply, her gaze unwavering. "When you care about someone, you show up. You give what you have. It's not complicated. And that's when he broke. The full weight of her goodness, her purity, crashed down on him. This was the answer to his father's riddle. This was the woman who saw his head, his heart, his soul, even when she thought he was crowned in nothing but dust. He slid out of the booth and onto his knees on the cold, sticky floor. He didn't care who was watching. He held the envelope to his chest like a sacred text. "Amara," he sobbed, looking up at her stunned face. "I have to tell you the truth." And he did. Right there on the floor of the diner, he confessed everything. The wealth, the identity, the fear, the elaborate, insane test. He told her his real name was Cale, and that the news reports were a lie. He told her he was so terrified of being loved for his money that he had built a fortress of deception. He expected anger, shouting, a slap across the face. Instead, Amara just stared at him, her expression moving through a rapid sequence of emotions: shock, confusion, a flash of deep hurt, and then a slow, dawning understanding. When he finished, his voice raw, silence filled the space between them. She was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching his. He could see the gears turning, piecing together the last 2 months. He saw the hurt in her eyes at being lied to, and his heart broke all over again. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "So, the beat-up truck is not yours?" The question was so absurd, so mundane, it broke the tension. A teary laugh escaped Cale's lips. "No," he said. "It's from a police auction. Marcus, my head of security, he bought it." "Marcus," she repeated, tasting the new name. "And your clothes?" "Thrift store," he admitted, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. She took a deep breath. She looked at the envelope in his hand, her life's work. Then she looked at the billionaire kneeling at her feet. She should have been furious. But looking at the genuine agony and love in his eyes, she understood the fear that had driven him. It was the other side of the coin to her own pain. David had discarded her for money. Cale was terrified of being wanted only for his. "Get up, Cale," she said softly, using his real name for the first time. He slowly rose, sliding back into the booth, his eyes never leaving hers, bracing for the verdict. "You lied to me," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And that hurts. But I think I understand why." She pushed the envelope back toward him. "But you can keep this, as a reminder." He looked at her, confused. "A reminder of what?" "A reminder," she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips, "of what it feels like to have nothing. And a reminder that there are people in the world who will love you even when you do." And then she stood up, turned, and walked out of the diner, leaving him alone with her life savings and the deafening sound of his own heartbeat. 6 months passed. 6 months of Cale, patiently, relentlessly, trying to earn back her trust. He didn't use grand gestures. He didn't shower her with gifts. He used his time. He showed up at the market, not as Leo, but as Cale. He helped her set up and pack up. He listened. For Amara, with the small business. For Amara, with the small business consultant. To help her draft a real plan for her bakery. Slowly, painstakingly, he rebuilt the bridge he had burned. She saw that the man she had fallen for, the kind, attentive, gentle soul, was still there, underneath the crushing weight of $1 billion fortune. The window in her heart, which had slammed shut, began to creak open once more. It was on a Tuesday afternoon that the invitation arrived. It was addressed to her old apartment, the one she had shared with David, and had been forwarded. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with embossed lettering. It was an invitation to the wedding of David Okoro and Simone Crestview. A final, petty act of cruelty. A clear message. Look at what I have. Look at what you are not. Amara stared at it, the memory of his public humiliation washing over her. Her first instinct was to tear it into 1,000 pieces and burn it. She was holding it over the trash can when Cale walked into her now slightly larger, much nicer apartment, a gift she had reluctantly accepted. "What's that?" he asked. She showed him. A grim, hard look passed over his face. "The man who broke you," he said, his voice low. "Throw it out," Amara said, her voice tight. "It's not worth the energy." Cale gently took the invitation from her hand. He looked at her, his eyes full of a fierce, protective love. "No," he said. "We're going." Amara was horrified. "Absolutely not. Cale, why would I ever want to step back into that room?" "Because you're not the same woman who ran out of that room," he said, his voice soft but unyielding. "He tried to make you feel small. I want you to walk in there and let him see how big your spirit truly is. You won't say a word to him. You'll just be you, and that will be enough." The night of the wedding was a spectacle of performative wealth. It was held at the city's most exclusive hotel ballroom, a cavern of crystal chandeliers and ostentatious flower arrangements. David stood at the entrance with his new bride, preening. He had arrived. His suit was expensive, his smile was wide, and his life was perfect. Then, a vehicle pulled up to the curb that made every other car look like a toy. A gleaming, black Rolls-Royce Phantom, silent as a shadow. The valet's eyes widened. A chauffeur in a crisp uniform, Marcus, stepped out and opened the back door. The first person to emerge was Cale Adebayo. He was dressed in a bespoke, dark navy Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than David's entire wedding budget. His hair was sharp, his presence radiating an easy, indisputable power. The crowd nearest the door fell silent. Whispers erupted. "Is that Cale Adebayo? I thought he was bankrupt." "No, that was a rumor. Look at him." But the real showstopper was the woman he turned and offered his hand to. Amara stepped out of the car. The transformation was breathtaking. She was wearing a gown that was not merely a dress, but a work of art. It was custom designed by Diola Sago, a master of Nigerian couture. It was fashioned from a magnificent, hand-woven gold kente cloth, shimmering under the lights. Woven into the intricate pattern, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it, was a single, continuous thread of pure 24-karat gold. A symbolic callback to a story she had once told Cale about her great-grandmother's wedding attire. Her hair was styled in an elegant, regal updo, adorned with delicate gold pins. Her makeup was subtle but perfect, highlighting her high cheekbones and luminous dark eyes. She wasn't just beautiful, she was glorious. She looked like the queen she had always been inside. They walked into the ballroom together, Cale's hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The ambient chatter of the room didn't just quiet down, it ceased. A wave of silence radiated out from the entrance as every head turned. It was the kind of silence that is louder than any noise. David and Simone were in the middle of greeting a guest. David's head snapped up to see what had caused the sudden hush. His jaw literally dropped. Wealth and power and grace, so far beyond wealth and power and grace, so far beyond his comprehension that his brain couldn't process it. Then he recognized her eyes, and the blood drained from his face. He turned a sickly, pale gray. Simone, his new bride, saw his reaction first, then followed his gaze. Her face, which had been a mask of smug satisfaction, twisted into an ugly snarl of jealousy and confusion. This was her night, her triumph. Who was this woman who had stolen the entire room with a single entrance? Cale and Amara glided through the room, not stopping, just moving toward the far side of the bar. They didn't need to say a word. Their presence was a statement. David, stumbling slightly, broke away from his own receiving line and hurried toward them, a desperate, confused look on his face. "Amara?" he stammered, his voice cracking. What are you doing here? How?" Amara finally looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, no hatred, no desire for revenge. There was only a calm, serene pity. She gave him a small, polite, devastatingly indifferent smile. She had followed Cale's advice. She didn't say a word. Cale, however, did. He stepped slightly in front of her, a protective gesture that was unmistakable. He looked David up and down with an air of mild disinterest. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Cale said, his voice cool and level. "I'm Cale Adebayo." He extended a hand, knowing full well David knew who he was. David stared at the hand as if it were a snake. The name, connected with the woman he had discarded like trash, broke his mind. He shook the hand weakly, his own slick with sweat. "You're with Amara?" David finally managed to get out. "She is my fiancée," Cale said, the words ringing with finality. He then turned to Amara, his expression softening into one of pure adoration. "And the future CEO of the Adebayo Culinary Arts Foundation, which we are launching next month with an initial endowment of $50 million to support small food entrepreneurs." He said it just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. And in that moment, David finally understood. He hadn't just dumped a baker. He had thrown away a diamond. He had traded a mountain of gold for a handful of glitter. His cruel words from 3 years ago echoed in the silent, opulent room. You can't build an empire on cupcakes. Amara had done better. She had inspired one. David looked at his new wife, who was glaring at him with pure venom, her perfect wedding ruined. He looked at Amara, standing there in her quiet power, a universe away from him, and he knew, with sickening certainty, that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The aftermath of the wedding was swift and brutal for David. The story of Cale Adebayo and his magnificent unknown fiancée completely overshadowed the nuptials. Photos of Amara's entrance went viral within their city's elite circles. She became an overnight sensation, the Queen of Kente, a symbol of grace and mystery. David's marriage to Simone started not with a honeymoon, but with a screaming match that could be heard down the hotel corridor. Simone, a woman whose entire identity was built on being the center of attention, could not forgive the humiliation. Their union was poisoned from the start, built on a foundation of resentment and the ghost of the woman David had so foolishly discarded. Worse for David, his business success was a house of cards. He had built his prestige properties firm on loans leveraged against his father-in-law's reputation and capital. He was a pilot fish, swimming alongside a shark. But a few months after the wedding, a downturn in the commercial real estate market hit his father-in-law's company, Crestview Developments, hard. The shark, needing to conserve its own energy, cut the pilot fish loose. The credit lines vanished. The investors pulled out. David's performative empire collapsed with shocking speed. The leased BMW was repossessed. The flashy office was shuttered. The house he and Simone lived in went into foreclosure. Simone, who had married him for the lifestyle he promised, left him without a second thought, her parting words echoing his own cruelty. "I need an asset, David, not a liability." 6 months later, a desperate and broken David Okoro found himself filling out an online application. It was for a night shift janitorial position at a massive, state-of-the-art logistics warehouse that had recently opened near the airport. The pay was minimum wage, the work was humbling, but he was out of options. The company was a subsidiary of Adebayo Global. He submitted the application, feeling the full, crushing weight of his life's poetic irony. Weeks later, he got a call. He had the job. On his first night, the shift supervisor handed him his work uniform and a small, sealed envelope. "The head office sent this for you," the supervisor said, shrugging. David opened it. Inside was not a letter of termination or mockery. It was a simple, printed memo on elegant letterhead. It read, "Application of David Okoro. Approved." And below the typed words, a small, handwritten note in neat, graceful script. It said simply, "Everyone deserves a chance to work hard and build something real. A.N. Amara Nkwocha." She knew. She had seen his application, and she had not sought revenge. She had not blocked his employment. She had offered him the one thing he had once mocked her for, the dignity of work. The simple, quiet grace of the act was more devastating than any gloating could ever have been. It was the final, quiet checkmate. Meanwhile, Amara's life blossomed. With Kale's support and the resources of her new foundation, she opened her dream bakery. It wasn't a massive, soulless franchise. It was a beautiful, warm, inviting space called Grandma's Hands. It had a state-of-the-art kitchen, but the front of the shop was filled with comfortable chairs, shelves of books, and the constant, welcoming aroma of fresh baking. It became a beloved neighborhood institution, a place where people came not just for the divine pastries, but for the sense of community. She hired and mentored other aspiring bakers, particularly immigrant women with recipes from their own grandmothers. Her hand, which had once baked to survive, now baked to give others a chance to thrive. Nia was accepted into RISD with a full scholarship, her incredible talent finally given the platform it deserved. Amara's grandmother was flown in from Ibadan, first class, for the wedding. She was a tiny, regal woman with eyes that saw everything. At the rehearsal dinner, she took Kale's hand in her own wrinkled one. "You are a rich man," she said, her voice raspy with age. "But your money is the least interesting thing about you. You saw the queen in my granddaughter when she was wearing rags. For this, you have my blessing." Their wedding was the opposite of David's. It was not a public spectacle, but an intimate, deeply personal affair held in the gardens of their new home. Amara wore a simple, elegant white dress, and Kale wore a suit that incorporated the same kente cloth as her gala gown. For his vows, Kale didn't speak of her beauty or his wealth. He pulled out the worn, creased withdrawal slip from the diner, the one for $4,278.15, which he had framed and kept on his desk. "You gave me this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me everything when you thought I had nothing. My vow to you, Amara, is to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the man you thought I was when I was just Leo." Amara cried, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. The hand that gives, she thought, is the hand that gathers. Her hands, her heart, were finally, completely full. In the end, this is a story about the true nature of wealth. It is not a story about a poor girl who won the lottery by marrying a rich man. It is a story about a rich woman who was discovered by a man brave enough to look past the world's shallow definitions of value. Amara was already rich. She was rich in character, rich in resilience, rich in a generosity so profound it was her very nature. Her wealth was in her calloused hands that could create comfort from flour and sugar. It was in her heart that refused to become bitter despite its breaking. It was in her spirit that met cruelty with grace and desperation with an open hand. Cale's money did not save Amara. It only gave her a platform to amplify the goodness that was already there. His true gift to her was not the foundation or the beautiful home. It was that he saw her. He saw her when she was tired and covered in flour and invisible to the rest of the world. And her gift to him was infinitely greater. She gave him back his humanity. She broke the gilded cage of his cynicism and taught him that real love is not an investment to be insured, but a sacrifice to be offered freely. She reminded him that a person's worth is not what they have in the bank, but what they are willing to give from the heart. The proverb of her grandmother became the thesis of their life together. The hand that gives is the hand that gathers. Amara gave her last dollar and gathered a universe of love. Cale gave up his identity and gathered a truth that set him free. And David, who only ever knew how to take, was left with nothing. True wealth is not about acquiring things. It is about recognizing value where others see none. It is the courage to see a queen in a baker's apron, a king in a thrift store hoodie, and an empire of love in a single shared pastry. Years later, you could still find them, a billionaire and his queen, sitting on plastic stools in a bustling market somewhere, sharing a warm puff-puff from a paper bag. Two people who had everything because they understood what was real. If this story moved your heart, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because every tale has a lesson, and Alfred's Folk Tales never forgets.